Hey, what is up, guys? Randomonium here. So today I have something very special for you guys. It is with great pleasure that I'm releasing a video about team compositions. This is arguably one of the best videos I've ever made, so I hope you enjoy it. This video is going to be an extremely long topic, so please grab a snack, pop open a cool, refreshing beverage, and maybe turn the speed up to 1.25 or 1.5 because we're going to be here for a while. I had an immense amount of fun making this video, and what I really loved is that this video happened because of your feedback. I got a lot of comments asking me to make a team comp video that expanded upon the topics that I already covered in my subclasses video, and that is what inspired me to make this video. So if there's another topic that you think I should cover, please don't be shy. Leave a comment, and if inspiration strikes me, I'll try to make a video on it. So the real focus of this video is to help you build team compositions with your friends, especially for the new Clash mode that's coming out very soon. That said, there's a lot of very valuable information in this video for you solo queue purists, since we'll be discussing how you can identify what your win conditions are for pretty much any combination of champions, as well as what your enemy's win conditions are and when you should be looking to dodge. What makes the subject of team composition so difficult to cover in a single video is that there are literally billions of possible team compositions in League of Legends. The way we're going to simplify things is we're going to separate all the champions into their classes and subclasses and talk about which subclasses work well within each team composition. Not only will this simplify team compositions, but it will also make it easier for you to tailor team compositions to each of your champion pools. Basically, there are 7 classes within League: Slayers, Fighters, Tanks, Controllers, Mages, Marksmen, and Specialists. We'll be talking more about Marksmen and Specialists in a bit, but for now let's focus on the 5 classes that are oriented around the Pentagon. The classes are oriented around the Pentagon to show which classes they are most similar to, not to show which classes they counter. For example, the Pentagon indicates that fighters are most similar to slayers and tanks, not that they counter mages and controllers. Each of the classes is pretty self-explanatory. Slayers are damage-focused melee champions, fighters are melee champions who are a mix of damage and tankiness, tanks are the toughest champions in the game, controllers are more crowd control oriented or supportive spellcasters, and mages are more damage-oriented spellcasters. Within each of these classes are offensive and defensive subclasses. Offensive subclasses are great at starting fights, chunking out enemies from long distances, or deleting enemies off the map with a single combo. Defensive classes are amazing at finishing fights. They are great when the enemy team tries to engage onto them, either because they have great 1v2 potential, or they have great ways to peel enemies off of their allies. The defensive subclasses are the subclasses that are closest to the center of the Pentagon, and they are skirmishers, juggernauts, wardens, enchanters, and battle mages. The offensive subclasses are the subclasses that are closest to the outer edge of the Pentagon and are assassins, divers, vanguards, catchers, artillery mages, and burst mages. Not only do the offensive and defensive subclasses within each class have a lot in common, offensive and defensive subclasses between adjacent classes also have a lot in common as well. For example, divers have a lot in common with assassins and vanguards. That said, there are some exceptions to the rule within the spectrum of classes. For example, there are a few divers who are very similar to the skirmisher class, and there are a few battle mages who are very similar to the juggernaut class. Overall, this concept is pretty solid though, and it's very useful to visualize how each of the classes are interconnected. Another extremely important aspect of classes and subclasses is that what class and subclass a champion belongs to does not change if they build different items or they take different runes. What subclass a champion belongs to is determined only by the champion's kit, and it's an intrinsic part of the champion that cannot be changed. For example, if you build a diver with all damage items, that does not make them an assassin. Likewise, if you build a diver with all tank items, that does not make them a vanguard. A diver is a diver regardless of what items you build or what runes you take. Marksmen and Specialists are in the center of the spectrum because each of those classes are so complex and diverse that they could each have their own spectrum. Each marksman and specialist varies widely in what team compositions they are best in, so we'll be discussing each champion within those classes in more detail later on. I'm not going to go into any more detail on classes and subclasses in this video, so if you're confused on how classes and subclasses work, please check out my How to Find Your Ideal Playstyle class and subclass video. I'll put a link to it in the upper right hand corner and also in the video description below. The point of this video is team compositions, so that's what I want to focus on with the remainder of the video. The purpose of a team composition is to have clearly defined win conditions, ways that you are going to gain an advantage over the enemy team so you can knock down their towers and ultimately win the game. A team composition is only powerful if you play to your team's win conditions. In general, there are 5 types of team compositions: attack compositions, catch compositions, protect compositions, poke compositions, and split compositions. Each composition has its own strengths and weaknesses, and each composition has its own win conditions. While no composition completely counters another, some team compositions have advantages over others. Basically, you can think of it as a more complex version of rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. In the diagram on the screen, a composition is strong against the composition that their arrow is pointing towards and weak against the other 2 compositions. Put another way, each composition on the diagram is strong against the 2 compositions counterclockwise to them, or anti-clockwise for you weirdos out there, and is weak against the 2 compositions that are clockwise to them. For example, an attack composition is strong against a split composition and a poke composition, but weak against catch compositions and protect compositions. It does not mean that if the enemy drafts a protect composition and you have an attack composition, that it's an automatic forfeit at 20. All it means is that the strengths and win conditions of a protect composition match up well with the weaknesses and win conditions of an attack composition, and you'll need to adjust your game plan to account for this disadvantage. This graphic will come into play later when we talk about band strategy and pick order for when you're playing with a group. Next, we're going to talk about the key attributes, win conditions, strengths, and weaknesses of each type of team composition. Afterwards, we're going to discuss what subclasses pair well with each type of team composition and go into some more advanced topics on team compositions. Attack compositions are some of the most common team compositions in League of Legends, especially in lower elos because they're very easy to execute. Attack compositions are also known as engage compositions or wombo combo compositions. Key attributes of attack composition are at least one engager, like a diver or vanguard, lots of hard crowd control, and massive AoE damage, and or a high DPS champion. Attack compositions win by team fighting. They excel in ARAM style fights and are great at contesting neutral objectives like Drake or Baron, especially when the enemy team is forced into a choke point. Attack compositions are extremely reliant on their ultimates and are sometimes called press R to win compositions. 2 of the most famous attack compositions are the Curse of the Sad Bullet Time composition and the Ball Delivery System composition. The Curse of the Sad Bullet Time composition involves Amumu and Misfortune and was popularized in the earlier seasons of League of Legends. When combined with other AoE ultimates, this combo of Amumu plus Misfortune ultimate was able to destroy most team compositions with very little counterplay, resulting in both champions being nerfed. Even today, this strategy is extremely viable in lower elos, so if you're looking for some quick LP with some friends, I recommend that you try it out. The Ball Delivery System composition is still used in professional play and involves Orianna, the queen of mid lane, and a diver or vanguard jungler with long-range engage like Rengar or Zac. Because Orianna's ball moves rather slowly, it's much more effective for Orianna to place her ball on an ally and allow them to jump into the middle of the team so she can activate her teamfight winning ultimate, hence the name Ball Delivery System. But that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to attack compositions. Any champion with good engage or strong AoE abilities is a strong contender for an attack composition. Even AD carries who like to build Runaans can be extremely strong in attack compositions. The downsides to attack compositions is they're extremely ultimate reliant. If you mess up your ultimates with an attack composition, then you're basically useless until your ultimates come off of cooldown. Furthermore, attack compositions really struggle when behind. Attack compositions rely on team fighting, and if you're behind, then you can't team fight effectively, basically negating your composition's greatest strength. Catch compositions are some of the most popular compositions currently in League of Legends, especially on the professional scene. In general, there are two types of catch composition: ambush and stampede. Ambush catch compositions rely on vision denial to bush bait enemies into face checking. When an enemy comes close, ambush catch compositions chain crowd control and delete the champion with single target burst damage. Stampede compositions rely on hiding in fog of war and then rapidly collapsing on an enemy when they overextend, using movement speed abilities and items or other engaged tools. Key attributes of a catch composition are burst damage, single target crowd control, and mobility. Catch compositions win through vision denial and engaging in unfair fights, dogpiling onto a single enemy to create 4v5 situations that they can use to take neutral objectives or towers. Catch compositions are great at punishing mistakes and punishing players for being too greedy, making them very powerful in solo queue. However, catch compositions typically have weaker 5v5 team fights than other compositions. They are extremely reliant on getting picks, and if they can't generate unfair fights, then they are usually at a disadvantage. Perhaps the most famous catch composition used in earlier seasons of League was the Global composition, which relied on champions like Ashe, Twisted Fate, Shen, Karthus, and Nocturne, combined with the Clairvoyant Summoner spell, which has since been removed from the game. More recent catch compositions rely heavily on runes such as Predator or items such as Righteous Glory to chase down out-of-position enemies. Protect compositions are pretty self-explanatory. They are compositions designed to protect one or two very powerful threats. The most common Protect composition is the Juggermaw composition, which involves surrounding Kog'Maw with tanks and other supportive champions so that it becomes near impossible to kill him. While single carry Protect compositions are the most common, dual carry Protect compositions can also be effective utilizing high DPS mid laners like Azir, Cassiopeia, or Kayle in combination with a high DPS marksman. Key attributes of a Protect composition are a hyperscaling DPS champion, disengaged crowd control, and utility. If your Protect composition has only one carry, it's recommended you pick a carry that does hybrid damage or true damage like Kog'Maw or Vayne, so the tanks can't easily itemize to counter your team's only damage threat. Disengaged crowd control is any type of crowd control that can halt an enemy engage, such as a Janna ultimate, a Nami ultimate, Gragas ultimate, a Nivea wall, or even a Trundle pillar. Utility is also essential for Protect compositions. Defensive utility allows you to protect your carry to the maximum extent possible since they are your team's only damage source, and offensive utility increases the prowess of your carries even more. The win conditions for a Protect composition is to draw the enemy into a 5v5 team fight and keep your carries alive at all costs. Utility items such as Locket of the Iron Solari, Knight's Vow, Ardent Censer, and Redemption are highly recommended. The pros of a Protect composition is that it's a very safe team composition for you with very good scaling, and it's a very tilting team composition to play against. Protect compositions also match up very well against attack and catch compositions, which are arguably two of the most popular types of team compositions in the game. The downsides of Protect compositions are that you have to stay grouped as 5, and they're extremely carry dependent. Protection comps have difficulty stopping multiple pushing lanes, especially if the enemy team has Baron buff. If your carry dies in a protection comp, then the rest of your team is basically useless until they respawn. Protection comps put all their eggs into one or two baskets, so if the carry or carries go down, it's curtains for the team. Protect compositions are great for groups where you have one or two players who are vastly better than the rest of the group. Put your best players on hyperscaling carries and draft supportive champions around them to help them carry harder. While it's most common for mid or bot lane to take up these carry roles, skirmishers played in the top lane or jungle like Fiora or Master Yi can also be the carry in a protection comp, though traditionally it's much harder to execute a protection comp with a melee carry than a ranged carry. Poke comps, also called poke and siege comps, were some of the most powerful compositions in the game during earlier seasons. Nowadays they aren't near as common, but if executed correctly they can be extremely oppressive. It's also important to note that poke and siege go together. You can't have a composition that does only one and still be successful. The poke portion of the composition forces enemies off of objectives due to them being chunked out from the poke, while the siege portion of the composition allows the team to take objectives while the poked out enemies return to base to heal. Poke compositions are different from most other compositions because they don't rely on kills or team fighting. The goal of a poke composition is to simply make it impossible for the enemy team to contest an objective and then take that objective for free. Key attributes of the poke composition are long range, the poke portion of the comp, tower damage, the siege portion of the comp, and disengage crowd control, which dissuades the enemy team from all-inning before the poke and siege comp can whittle down their health. Poke compositions win by simply grinding out an opponent in a war of attrition. Once enemy carries are low enough health, they'll need to retreat or they'll risk dying outright to the poke. This allows a poke composition to move in and simply take the objective for free while the carries are in base. Items like Banner of Command and ZZ Portal are also great in poke compositions, as is the Demolish Rune and the Resolve Tree. Poke compositions have unparalleled objective control. They can feel near unstoppable when executed properly. However, poke compositions require a lot of patience and they can be very difficult to pull off. They require high accuracy with skill shots and well-timed disengage crowd control to prevent a team wipe. Poke compositions also need to group together to be effective, making it hard for them to pressure multiple objectives or defend multiple objectives. Split push compositions are some of the most loved and the most hated compositions in League. When executed poorly, nothing will get you flamed quicker. When executed properly, nothing will get you more praise. There are two flavors of split push compositions, 1-4 compositions and 1-3-1 compositions. 1-4 compositions are the most common and utilize a single split pusher pushing either top or bot lane while the remaining 4 allies push mid lane. 1-3-1 compositions are significantly harder to execute because you have 2 split pushers, but they're also much more powerful because you can exert pressure in 3 lanes simultaneously. Key attributes of a split push composition are a strong duelist to be your split pusher and strong wave clear in your remaining team members. A strong duelist is required because split pushers need to be able to 1v1 anyone on the map. This causes the enemy team to have to send multiple people to stop the split pusher, giving the remaining members a man advantage. Strong wave clear is needed on the remaining members so they can prevent sieges from the enemy team, and they can also push lanes quickly if the enemy team tries to collapse on the split pusher. Split push compositions win by splitting the enemy team apart, freezing them in indecisiveness and causing them to waste their time while you're constantly on the offensive. Split push compositions are unique because they create massive amounts of pressure in multiple lanes. The downsides of split push compositions is that they are extremely high risk. Creating massive pressure will cause the enemy team to take drastic actions to try and stop it, and as a split push team you need to be prepared to thwart this counter aggression. Being a split push composition is all about retreating just before the enemy strikes and moving pressure to another lane. If the enemy team tries to engage on the main group, then the main group should retreat and the split pusher should try to surge forward and take his tower in the side lane. If the enemy team tries to collapse on the split pusher, then the split pusher should retreat and the main group should hard push forward to take the tower in the mid lane. No matter what move the enemy team makes, always stay just out of reach and punish them for their decision. Needless to say, this strategy is very dependent upon proper warding and constantly keeping an eye on the minimap, which can be very difficult for some players. The general rule of thumb when having a split push composition is that you always want to be in the same line as your split pusher and the rest of your team. What this means is if your split pusher is at the outer tower, you want your main team to be at the outer tower as well, and you don't want to advance further than that until your split pusher moves forward. That allows your team to exert equal pressure in multiple lanes and makes it very difficult for the enemy team to collapse on either your split pusher or your main team without losing pressure in other lanes. Now that we've gone through the basics of classes and subclasses and we've explained how each team composition works, it's time to talk about what classes work well with each team composition. On the screen is a table where each row corresponds to a different subclass and each column corresponds to a different team composition. Marksmen and specialists aren't on this table and will be discussed a little later on. Each cell in the table is color-coded to indicate how well that subclass matches up with the team composition. S tier is purple, A tier is red, B tier is blue, C tier is green, and D tier is yellow. In each box, the letters correspond to the role that the subclasses are normally played. T is for top, J is for jungle, M is for mid, B is for bot, and S is for support. The tier system is not intended to show which subclass is the quote-unquote best, since what is best is often extremely subjective and dependent upon the players and the other champions on your team. Subclasses are ranked based on how complementary each subclass is to each team composition and how easy it is to insert a champion of that subclass into the team composition. S tier means that you can pick pretty much any champion from that class into that team composition and will most likely work pretty well. For example, pretty much any artillery mage works well in a poke composition, and pretty much every enchanter works well in a protect composition. A tier indicates that most champions will work in most situations, but there may be certain champions that don't mesh well with other champions within that team composition. For example, battle mages typically work well in attack compositions, but there may be certain instances where you need a champion with more reliable engage or longer range. B tier is the situational tier. There may be champions within this subclass that work amazing with that team composition, and there may be other champions that are awful with that team composition. For example, freight train juggernauts like Skarner can be quite amazing in catch compositions, but raid bosses like Darius can be quite bad in catch compositions without a lot of additional help. C tier is even more situational than B tier. Subclasses in C tier can work, but they need the right team to back them up. For example, skirmishers are not optimal at all in protect compositions, but there are rare times when you can build a protect composition around a skirmisher and it will be successful. D tier subclasses can work, but in general there's usually a subclass that fulfills the same role easier. They typically need the player to be really good with that particular subclass in order to make it work. For example, you can make a diver work in a poke comp, but in general there are usually better champion classes that can fill that role. Attack compositions are looking to 5v5 teamfight with lots of engage and AoE damage. This makes vanguards and burst mages some of the best classes for attack compositions. Divers, artillery mages, and battle mages are also very strong in attack compositions. Wardens and catchers are situational for attack compositions. With the right champions they can be great, and with the wrong champions they can be a suboptimal pick. Assassins, skirmishers, juggernauts, and enchanters can work well in attack compositions, but in general it's harder to make them work in attack compositions than other champions. Catch compositions are looking for mobility, crowd control, and burst damage. Assassins, divers, catchers, and burst mages all fill these traits very well and are some of the easiest classes to incorporate into a catch composition. Because vanguards have very strong engage, mobility, and crowd control, they are also very strong in catch compositions. Skirmishers, juggernauts, wardens, artillery mages, and battle mages are all very situational. Some champions within these classes can be amazing in catch compositions, and some need some ingenuity in order to be successful. The classes that struggle the most with catch compositions are enchanters. Some enchanters in certain situations can be very useful in catch compositions, but in general, there are usually better picks for catch compositions. Protect compositions are all about utility and disengaged crowd control. In these areas, wardens and enchanters are hands down the best classes in the game. Juggernauts and battle mages are actually surprisingly good in protect compositions since they're very good at controlling the battlefield and creating areas that the enemy team cannot easily pass through. Divers, vanguards, and catchers are all situationally good in protect compositions. They can all use their crowd control to peel for their allies, but in general their kits are more designed for attacking rather than defending. Some catchers have very potent forms of utility, though, that are extremely useful in protect compositions. Skirmishers and burst mages tend to struggle in protect compositions, though in certain instances you can build a protect composition around a skirmisher. Assassins and artillery mages struggle the most in protect compositions since they don't have very reliable disengage and virtually no utility. No class is more suited for poke compositions than an artillery mage. To back them up, wardens and enchanters are also extremely strong in poke composition due to their disengage abilities. Catchers, burst mages, and battle mages can also be extremely strong in poke compositions due to their potent crowd control, long range, and or battlefield control. Juggernauts are situational in poke compositions. Some can be great if they have poking abilities or battlefield control abilities of their own, and some are only useful as a deterrent to an engage. In general, assassins and vanguards tend to struggle in poke compositions since a lot of their kits are based around engaging in fights, not poking out enemies. Skirmishers and divers are the classes that are least well equipped to be in poke compositions. All of these champions are melee, and very few of them have long-range abilities that would be useful in a poke composition. Skirmishers and Juggernauts are the premier split pushers in the game. Assassins can also be very strong split pushers, and Enchanters are great in split push compositions because they can help the rest of the team disengage when the split pusher is in the side lane. Divers, Wardens, and Battle Mages are all situational in split push compositions. Some Divers, Wardens, and Battle Mages can split push very well, while others aren't near as useful. Vanguards, Catchers, and Burst Mages tend to struggle in split push compositions, though they can be extremely strong as a roamer who assists the split pushers in times of need when the enemy team thinks that he's alone. Artillery Mages struggle the most in split push compositions since they are very immobile. However, the wave clear of Artillery Mages can be extremely useful in split push compositions if they can play safe. Now that you know in general what subclasses pair with what team comps, we need to go into a little bit more detail with Marksmen and Specialists since those classes are so diverse. For Marksmen, you can see that most traditional Marksmen are very good in attack compositions and protect compositions since both of those compositions win by team fighting, and many Marksmen really shine in team fights. For catch compositions, the premier Marksmen are Ashe and Jhin, though Ezreal, Kai'Sa, Sivir, and Varus can also fit nicely into most catch compositions. Among poke compositions, your best choices are Caitlyn, Corki, and Ezreal, though Ashe and Varus can also be successful in most poke compositions. In split push compositions, Sivir is the best marksman to hold mid lane while her split pusher does damage, while Lucian and Vayne can be potent split pushers on their own. Among the specialists, things are a little less clear cut. Azir and Cho'Gath are best in attack and protect compositions. Elise and Nidalee are best in catch and poke compositions. Fiddlesticks is best in attack and poke compositions. Gangplank is best in attack, poke, and split push compositions. Gnar and Graves are best in attack and split push compositions. Heimerdinger and Jace are best in poke and split push compositions. Kayle is best in attack, protect, and split push compositions. Kayn is best in attack and catch compositions. Kennen is best in attack and split push compositions. Quinn and Singed are best in catch compositions and split push compositions. And Zillion is best in protect and poke compositions. And of course, our Lord and Savior Teemo is amazing in all compositions. There is no time when Teemo is not an optimal pick. All hail all hail Teemo. I'm just kidding, guys. Teemo is best in split push compositions and catch compositions. Alright, let's recap. We briefly went over the classes and subclasses, and I showed you what each subclass is strong at. I then introduced you to the 5 different team compositions, showed you which team compositions are favored against what other team compositions, and I went through the key attributes, win conditions, pros, and cons for each team composition. We then dug deeper into the subclasses and discussed which subclasses work best with each team composition. And of course, the last topic we covered is what team compositions Marksmen and Specialists work best in. Now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, we can finally talk about how you can apply this to both your solo queue games and games where you're playing with a group. But first, I want to address a very common misconception about team compositions. Team compositions are not black and white. You're never 100% one team composition and 0% another team composition. There will be one team composition that your team is going to identify most with, but in certain situations, a team comp can morph from one composition to another based on where the gold is located on your team. For example, you may have drafted a protect composition with a Juggernaut in the top lane to act as a meat shield for your carry. However, if your carry falls massively behind and your Juggernaut gets fed, then it may be better for you to transition to a split push composition rather than waiting 30 minutes for your carry to catch back up. Always keep an open mind when looking at your team compositions and identifying in what situation your win conditions and thus your team composition will change. This takes a lot of practice to do effectively, so be sure to think about in Champion Select what is your primary team composition and how your team composition can morph depending on what happens in the game. With that said, let's next talk about how you can employ what you've learned for solo queue, and then we'll finish off the video by going into a lot more detail with all the cool stuff you can do when you're in a group to build really strong team compositions. Solo queue is a very difficult beast. You really can't control your allies' picks, so building a team composition is much harder. That said, you do have choice over your own pick. If you're picking later in the draft and you have a decently diverse champion pool, picking a champion that helps unify your team's win conditions can greatly boost your chances for winning. For example, if your team looks like they're going to be drafting a Protect composition, it might not be the best time to insta-lock an Assassin. However, if your team is drafting a Pick composition, then that Assassin pick may be exactly what the doctor ordered. What you really don't want to do is play a champion that you're not familiar with, however. It doesn't matter if Yasuo is the perfect pick for your team. If you don't know how to play Yasuo, then don't play him. Ultimately, player skill is more important than any team synergy. If you only know how to play one or two champions, then it's far better to play those champions competently than struggle on a champion who is the quote-unquote perfect pick for your team. So ideally you have a champion pool broad enough that you can pick a champion that you're both good with and that also fits your team composition. But what if you're a one-trick pony or you're the first pick and your team didn't declare any champions? Well, in that case, this whole team comp stuff can still be extremely useful because it can help you identify your team's win conditions and the enemy team's win conditions. I can't tell you how often I see people making poor decisions because they don't identify their win conditions or the enemy's win conditions. I've lost hundreds, maybe even thousands of games because my team either didn't play towards our win conditions or they played right into the enemy's win conditions. So that's the topic we're going to cover next. We're going to go through all the possible team composition matchups and talk about how you should play each one. Let's first talk about attack versus catch compositions. This matchup favors catch compositions because catch compositions excel at blowing up enemies and turning fights into 5v4s, which prevents the attack composition from executing their 5v5 team fight win condition. If you're playing a catch composition against an attack composition, patience is the key. Never fight a fair 5v5 team fight. An attack composition will wreck you in a straight-up fight, so you need to look for picks and capitalize on enemy mistakes. Setting up strong vision and denying enemy vision is paramount since it ensures that you're safe to engage onto a lone enemy. Look for when the enemies go to push out side lanes or ward their jungle and then engage on them when they least expect it. If you're an attack composition playing against a catch composition, then above all else you need to stick together. Anytime you're separated, you are in grave danger. Anytime someone goes off to push a side lane, you need to play extremely safe. When playing against a catch composition, it's extremely important not to fall too far behind early. Play safe and wait for the mid game where you can group up and team fight. Once you reach mid game, it's important to set up slow pushing lanes in two of the lanes and then group up in the third lane, which is typically mid lane. Put pressure on towers and then move as a group through the jungle and clear out vision on your way to neutral objectives or other towers. The way you win against a catch composition is to force them into 5v5 team fights, and the best way to bait them into that fight is over Drakes, Rift Herald, and Baron. Next, let's talk about attack versus protect compositions. This matchup is one of my favorites because it's one of the most commonly misplayed. This matchup favors protect compositions because protect comps excel in 5v5 team fights, and they're great at stopping engages, which is exactly what attack comps want to do. So if you're playing an attack comp, what should be your game plan? Well, first off, the goal should be to get an early game advantage. Protect compositions are typically more late game focused, so it's extremely important that you put a lot of pressure on in the early game. If you reach your one item power spikes before the protect composition, then you immediately want to force a fight over Dragon, Rift Herald, or a tower. If the protect comp is too impatient and tries to fight you when they're still weak, then you should mop the floor with them and be able to snowball your gold advantage from there. The later the game goes on, the harder it becomes for attack compositions to beat protect comps. If you reach that tipping point where you can no longer fight the protect comp in a 5v5 team fight, your best bet at salvaging the game is to split them up. Protect compositions are extremely powerful as a group of 5, but they're typically not very good in 1v1, 2v2, or 3v3 skirmishes. As the attack composition, you want to split your team into groups equal to the protect comp's number of carries plus 1. For example, if the protect comp has 1 carry, then you want to separate your team into 2 groups. And the protect comp has 2 carries, then you want to separate your group into 3 groups. Split the groups as evenly as possible. For example, split your team into a group of 3 and a group of 2 against a single carry comp, and as a group of 2, 2, and 1 against a dual carry comp. This will force the Protect composition into a situation where they don't have a carry in one of their lanes. That group is the one that needs to exert heavy pressure in their lane, while the others put light pressure in the other lanes. As the Protect composition rotates their carries, change which lane exerts the pressure. When done correctly, this will slowly chip down the enemy towers, and there'll be very little they can do to stop it, since they won't have the engage potential to catch your team, assuming that you have everything properly warded. If you're playing a Protect composition against an attack composition, all you need to do is wait and farm. Protect compositions naturally outscale attack compositions, so the later the game goes, the better things get for you. The worst thing you can do as a Protect composition against an attack composition is to be too aggressive too early. As long as you don't fall too far behind in the early game, you will be in a commanding position, so don't go for risky plays in the early game. Once your carries are on at least 2 items is when you can start looking to team fight. Do not split up. If you need to push out a side lane, do so quickly and set up a slow push so you won't have to return to that lane for a while. Stay grouped as 5 and save your disengaged crowd control for when the attack composition commits to the fight. If the attack composition is disciplined and won't engage, force them into a 5v5 team fight by starting Baron or Drake. Next, we'll talk about attack versus poke compositions. In this matchup, attack compositions are favored because they usually have enough engage to power through a poke comp's disengage, and poke comps usually don't favor very well when they have enemies in their face. Overall, this matchup is extremely volatile and early game dependent. If the poke composition gets too far ahead, then they will eventually be able to overpower the attack comps in team fights, leaving the attack composition without a win condition. If the attack composition gets too far ahead, then the poke damage of the poke composition will no longer be meaningful, leaving the poke composition without a win condition. Obviously, this makes the early game incredibly important for both teams. If you're the attack composition, the worst thing you can do is be indecisive. Anytime your ultimates are off cooldown, you should be looking to fight. The longer you stand around and size each other up, the more of a chance a poke comp has at knocking one of your carries into dangerous health levels. As the attack composition, you want to utilize flanks whenever possible. Poke comps are generally decent at stopping engages from a single direction, but they're going to struggle when you hit them from the side or behind. When you engage, it's important that you focus on eliminating either their primary poker or their primary sieger. Take out one of these players, and the poke composition can't control objectives near as effectively. Finally, when playing against a poke composition, it pays to rush some early health regen like Warmog's armor or some early lifesteal so you can sustain through their poke. If you're the poke composition, you need to get an advantage early. First tower is a necessity, so play around the lane that is most likely to make that tower fall first. Once you drop the first tower, quickly rotate to other towers. If you can get at least a 2-tower advantage, then you have a decent chance at winning the game as long as you don't get too cocky. Once you have a lead, be patient and cautious with it. Be very mindful of death timers and ultimate timers, and be very careful not to overextend. Devote extra ward coverage to your flanks since that's where you're at your weakest. When the team fight occurs, your only chance at surviving is perfectly timed disengage. That's the honest truth. In this matchup, the entire game is on the shoulders of your supportive and tank champions. If they botch their disengage, then you're likely to get aced. If they reliably hit their crowd control, then you have a shot at beating an attack composition at their own game. Attack versus split push compositions is another common matchup that you're going to see. This matchup is all about who is able to impose their will, and which side is able to keep the other on the back foot. Baron buff and Elder buff are extremely important in this matchup, and whichever team secures those objectives is highly likely to win. Attack compositions are favored in this matchup because in general it's easier to execute an attack composition than a split push composition, and attack compositions have an advantage at securing powerful neutral objectives. If you're playing the attack composition in this matchup, it's all about making their split pusher afraid to split. Camp him in the early game and prevent him from snowballing a lead. In the mid and late game, you need to deny vision between the main team and the split pusher. Set up slow pushing lanes in top and bot, and look to force a fight in mid lane or at one of the neutral objectives. If the split push team tries to contest, it's important to be decisive. If the objective is low, finish it before turning to fight. If the objective still has above 1/3 health, then consider turning and fighting the enemy. If the enemy jungler jumps in to steal, halt all damage on the neutral objective and kill the jungler before finishing off the epic monster. Jungle steals are one of the best ways for split push teams to beat attack compositions, so never give the enemy jungler a chance at a 50-50 smite fight. If the enemy split pusher refuses to group, it's often best to just dive the rest of his team and try to ace them. Your team should be able to take towers faster than he can, so keep hard pushing once you have a man advantage. If you're playing the split push composition in this matchup, then getting your split pusher ahead is vital for success. Your split pusher needs to be able to solo any champion in the game, so it's essential that you funnel resources onto him. The goal of the rest of your team is to play just out of reach of the enemy team. Keep them barely on the edge of your vision, tracking them but never getting close enough for a fight. Tracking the enemy team is essential for keeping your split pusher safe, and keeping your split pusher safe is essential for winning the game. Vision control to spot the enemy team rotating is extremely important. As the enemy team looks to clear out your vision, you need to fight to re-establish that vision, or your team will never be able to split push effectively. If the enemy team tries to start Drake or Baron, your goal is to stall around the objective as much as possible, but don't commit to a fight. Stall around the objective and give your split pusher more time to push lanes and take towers. When the objective gets low, it's fine for your jungler to go for a steal, even if that means sacrificing his life, but don't commit anyone else to the fight. If the enemy team collapses on the split pusher, you should be immediately looking to take a tower or a neutral objective with the rest of the team. Now that we've gone through the attack composition matchups, let's move on to the catch composition matchups. We've already discussed attack versus catch compositions, so we'll first talk about catch versus protect compositions. This matchup is all about who makes more mistakes and which team is better at punishing those mistakes. In general, protect compositions are favored in this matchup because the utility and disengage provided by a protect composition should be enough to keep their allies alive through a catch composition's burst damage. If you're playing the catch composition in this situation, it's very important to be patient and be very decisive in your engages. Anytime someone is split away from their team, you should be looking to kill them, but only go for the kill if you have the rest of the enemy team accounted for. If you jump onto the enemy and the rest of their team is hiding in a bush, then there's a very good chance that you're going to get aced. You cannot fight a protect composition in a straight up fight, so always be looking for unfair fights. Vision denial is absolutely huge in this matchup, so having multiple sweepers and investing in vision wards is essential for success. Another way you can generate picks is when you're rotating from lane to lane or lane to neutral objectives. As long as you've denied vision, when you make a rotation and the enemy team rotates to try and stop you, they'll frequently put themselves in positions that will allow you to get a pick before they can react. Catch compositions should have the advantage in the early game, so do your best to gank and roam early and often in order to snowball the game out of control. Protect compositions are a ticking time bomb, so the longer the game goes on, the higher risk it becomes. If you're playing as the protect composition, you need to stay grouped as 5 as much as possible. Catch compositions rely on players being greedy, so never push alone without significant ward coverage. Catch compositions will do their best to clear out vision in your jungle. When you go and try to re-establish that vision, always go as a group and always face check with your tankiest member first. The primary way that you're going to win against a catch composition is to become that slow marching death ball that methodically takes down towers and never splits up. Another way you can beat a catch composition is using one of your allies as bait and tricking the catch composition to engage into a 5v5 team fight. This tactic can be extremely powerful when executed properly, but it relies on you effectively denying vision from the catch composition. Catch versus poke compositions are a very interesting matchup. Catch compositions are always looking for a strong engage against an out-of-position enemy, and since poke compositions are usually not very mobile, catch compositions can definitely exploit that. However, poke compositions are amazing at chipping away health bars, making it hard for catch compositions to assassinate someone without taking heavy losses themselves. In general, this typically gives poke compositions an advantage since they can trade well into catch compositions when they go for a pick. Ultimately, what really decides this matchup is skill shot accuracy, since catch compositions are reliant on skill shots for their crowd control, and poke compositions are reliant on their skill shots for their damage. If you're playing the catch composition in this situation, vision control and denial become even more important than in other matchups. Poke compositions need vision to hit with their long-range abilities, and also protect their vulnerable flanks, so denying vision makes it much harder for a poke composition to pressure objectives. Poke compositions also traditionally need to stay grouped to be most effective, so splitting multiple objectives can often be a good call, especially since catch compositions are more mobile than poke compositions. As poke compositions rotate to different objectives, catch compositions can often pick off stragglers, allowing them to more effectively push towers and contest neutral objectives. If you're the poke composition in this situation, it's all about playing slow, methodical, and deliberate. If you're accurate with your skill shots, then a catch composition will struggle to beat you in a 5v5 team fight, so staying grouped is often a good call. Your greatest weakness is your immobility, so be extremely wary when face checking into areas where you don't have vision, or when pushing when one of your allies is in a side lane. Tanks should always lead when trying to establish vision. If the catch composition tries to split your focus by pushing multiple objectives, always threaten a more valuable objective. For example, if they threaten the bottom inhibitor, go for Baron. You won't be able to stop a multiple objective push, but you can force the catch composition to group by threatening an extremely valuable objective like Baron or Elder Drake. Catch versus split composition is a game of cat and mouse. The game often revolves around how good the split pusher is at escaping and stalling, and how good the catch composition is at killing the split pusher. In general, catch compositions have the advantage in this matchup because it's far easier for a team of people to catch one person than it is for one person to reliably be able to escape from them. Furthermore, it can be hard to punish catch compositions when they go for picks on the split pusher, so catch compositions usually lose very little for chasing him, and if they catch him, then that gives them immense pressure around objectives like towers and barons. If you're playing the catch composition, it's all about shutting down the split pusher. Camp him early and deny his vision late. Do not be afraid to blow flash or other summoner spells if it secures you a kill, because killing the split pusher is often all you need to start a baron or push down some towers. Another thing you can do as a catch composition is make it look like you're going to collapse on the split pusher, and when his team moves to try and protect him, you collapse on them instead. If you're playing the split push composition, your split pusher needs to be able to 1v2, and he either needs to have the mobility to consistently escape, or he needs to have the tankiness in order to stall long enough for help to arrive. If the catch team routinely goes for your split pusher, you can often bait them into a bad fight by hiding one of your allies in a nearby brush, allowing you to turn the fight in your favor. For example, if the enemy team sends 4 people bot to kill your split pusher, then your team should immediately start Baron. That finished up the catch composition matchup, so let's move on to the protect composition matchups. We've already talked about attack versus protect compositions and catch versus protect compositions, so let's now talk about protect versus poke compositions. This is a really interesting matchup since both compositions tend to play very defensive and both like to group up as a group of 5. In general, though, poke compositions generally outrange protect compositions, and protect compositions typically lack the engage power to close the distance on poke compositions, which gives poke compositions an advantage. If you're playing the protect composition, you need to find ways to start team fights. This can be through crowd control from one of your tanks or utility champions, or from movement speed items, but you need to find a way to close the distance. The worst thing you can do against a poke composition is to be overly passive. That said, you still want to wait for your item power spikes before going for engages. Typically, carries in a protect composition need at least 2 items before their damage starts to get really insane, so make sure your carries are ready to fight before you start going for something like a flash engage. Another way to force fights is around neutral objectives like Drake and Baron. Vision denial is key in these situations, so be sure to stock up on vision wards before starting an objective. If the enemy team has vision on the objective, then they can just continue to poke you from long range, and your tanks won't be able to engage on them, putting you in a very precarious position where you're taking damage from both the epic monster and the enemy team. If you're playing the poke composition, avoid team fights at all costs. Protect compositions have some of the best team fighting in the game, so you should never be committing to an even fight. Protect compositions are extremely reliant on their carries, so focus on trying to land your poke on the hyper carry. If the carry in the protect composition needs to back, then that gives you a massive window to push down towers, set up vision, or even start up a neutral objective like Baron or Drake. Above all else, be patient, especially in the late game. In the late game, the enemy carries in a protect composition are capable of destroying your entire team, but they will still be extremely squishy, so every spell you land on them will still hit like a truck. This means the accuracy of your skill shot damaging spells will often be the difference between victory and defeat. Protect versus split compositions is actually a very unusual matchup that usually results in very few kills on either side. While protect compositions normally want a team fight, they don't normally have the engage to do so. Conversely, split push team compositions don't want to fight. This often results in the teams dancing around each other without too much happening. The team that usually wins in these situations is a team that can push lanes and take towers more effectively. Since split push compositions usually have very good wave clear on the main group of their team, split push compositions usually have an edge over protect compositions, since typically no one in the protect composition can match up against the split pusher, allowing them to push the lane and take towers with very little risk. If you're playing the protect composition, you need to find a way to bait the split push team into a team fight. This may involve starting Baron or Drake and then turning to team fight when they try to contest, or it may involve trying to dive the main group of the enemy team in a 5v4 team fight under tower. As a protect composition, you may also want to consider purchasing lane pushing items like Banner of Command and ZZ Rot Portal on your tanks and supportive champions so that you can match the lane pushing power of the split pusher. Baron is amazing at shutting down split pushing, so securing Baron for your team is an extremely powerful way to secure the win. Be wary of the enemy jungler stealing, however. If the enemy jungler steals, then that will all but guarantee a loss, since the enemy team will be able to push multiple lanes at once, and you will have very few ways to stop them. If you're playing the split push composition, this is where your split pusher gets to have a field day. If you're the split pusher, the game is basically on your shoulders to win or lose. Itemize to maximize your wave clear and tower taking ability, but still be able to 1v1 anyone on the enemy team. If you're part of the main group on the split push team, never fight the enemy team. I know this may sound boring, but your only job is to wave clear and make sure the protect composition doesn't collapse on your split pusher. If the enemy team gets desperate and goes for Baron, keep split pushing and look for the steal. Don't fight them, even if it means they get Baron. Just keep pressuring multiple objectives, and eventually they will crack under the pressure. The last matchup we're going to cover is poke versus split push compositions. This is another matchup that isn't normally seen very much and often results in a lot of passive play, since both of these compositions are more objective focused rather than team fight focused. Split push compositions tend to be an advantage in this matchup since they can pressure multiple objectives, while poke compositions tend to only be able to pressure one objective and they struggle at defending multiple objectives. If you're playing the poke composition in this matchup, the early game is how you're going to win. Poke compositions are really good at getting first tower, so your goal should be to push out lanes and group early to push down a tower. It's easiest to do this in bot lane with a 4 or 5 man tower dive bot, but you also have the possibility to do this mid or perform a lane swap after the 5-minute mark and take top tower. Once you have first tower, you should immediately be looking to rotate your bot lane to take down a second tower. The goal should be to get all 3 outer towers before the split push team can get 2 of yours. Rift Herald is also extremely important in this matchup, so be sure to slay him before the 20-minute mark. When possible, use Rift Herald to take down the mid-inner tower, and then rotate between mid lane and the side lanes to slowly chip away at the top inner and the bot inner towers. Your best way to prevent a split push comp from winning is to get such a significant tower advantage that the enemy team can't push out past their river to threaten your towers. If you're playing the split push composition, you basically want to do the same thing. If your split pusher is your top laner, then you should be looking to roam with your jungle in your mid laner top lane to slay the enemy top laner and take top tower. After you take top tower, look to take Rift Herald or continue knocking down other towers. Whatever team has the tower lead is the team that can push past river and impose their will. As long as you don't fall more than one tower behind the poke team, and your split pusher has been farming well, then you should have the advantage, and you should be able to take objectives in the side lanes faster than the enemy team can knock down your towers. When you're playing solo queue, this team composition analysis can also help you decide when it's best to dodge a game. Dodging games is one of the most underutilized tools in the game to ensure consistent climbing. When you dodge a game, you lose either 3 LP or 10 LP depending on when was your last dodge. This may sound really bad, but the real advantage of dodging is that you don't lose MMR. MMR is what determines how much LP you gain or lose with each win or loss, so the LP penalty for dodging can be negated completely by the fact that you'll gain more LP when you win in future games, since your MMR is unaffected by a dodge. So when should you dodge? Well, one of the best reasons to dodge is when you cannot identify your team's win conditions in Champion Select. If you look at your team and you have no idea what your team composition is or how you're going to win, then that's a pretty damn good sign that you should dodge that game. Another time you should consider dodging is when the enemy team comp counters your team composition. While having your team comp countered isn't necessarily an automatic loss, winning in this situation usually relies on everybody communicating and being on the same page, which is a bit uncommon in solo queue. In these situations, whether or not you should dodge really comes down to the team's communication and their familiarity with the champions that they're playing. If your team is getting along well in Champion Select and everyone's playing champions where they have good win rates with a decent amount of games played, then you have a reasonably good chance at pulling out the win. However, if your team is fighting in Champion Select, or if your team is playing champions that they don't have a lot of experience with, or they don't have a good win-loss record with, then it's a pretty good indication that things are not going to go well and you should probably dodge. Another common reason to dodge is if your team is all one damage type. If you have an all AD or an all AP composition, then your late game will suffer immensely and you'll be very dependent upon snowballing the early game out of control. Always keep in mind that team compositions can morph depending on which of your allies get fed or what items are bought, so before dodging, consider how your team can adapt in-game or how you can ensure that the right people in your team get fed to maximize your chance of winning. Alright, so now that we've covered all the different team composition matchups and we've covered when you should dodge in solo queue, it's time to finally talk about all the cool stuff you can do with team compositions in game modes like Flex Queue and Clash. So I've made a quick spreadsheet that you can use to build out your team compositions. I'll be sure to link it in the video description below. First, I'd recommend going to a statistical site like lolalytics.com, leagueofgraphs.com, op.gg, or champion.gg and check out which champions have high win rates and pick rates right now, especially in your region. You can make a list of these champions for each role in the bottom left of the spreadsheet. Next, ask the players in your team to list all of the champions they feel comfortable playing in ranked from their most comfortable to their least comfortable. This list goes in the upper left of the spreadsheet. If you want even more detail, you can ask your teammates to rate their skill with each champion and color code the cells depending on each person's skill level. After that, you want to go through each person's champion pool and reorganize them in order of what champions fit best with attack compositions. So for top lane, you'd want to put his Vanguard champions first, then his Divers and Battle Mages, then his Wardens, and then finally his Skirmishers and Juggernauts. In the case that a teammate plays multiple champions from the same subclass, you want to put them in the order from most comfortable to least comfortable. Once you've done this for each of your teammates and yourself, you can move on to looking at your ban strategy. Based on what we've already covered in this video, you know that attack comps struggle against catch compositions and protect compositions, so look through the champions that are strong in the meta and identify all the champions that would work well in either a catch composition or a protect composition. Now that you've completed your champion pools and ban strategy for attack compositions, you can do the same thing for catch compositions, protect compositions, poke compositions, and split compositions. Once you're done, look at your champion pools for each composition and figure out which composition your champion's pools match up best with and order them from best to worst. Once you've mapped out everything, it's time to sit down, talk with your teammates, and finalize your team compositions. Talk with all of them and make sure they all agree on your orderings of the champions for each team composition and they agree with the ban priorities in each role. Finally, make sure that everyone agrees on what your best team compositions are and what order you want to play them, keeping in mind that it's perfectly fine to play the same team composition multiple times in a series if you feel like it's working well. Congratulations, you're now ready to start your first game as a team. For your first game, select a primary team composition that you want to draft for, usually your best team composition, and keep in mind 2 backup team compositions for situation where your team comp gets countered. If you're playing Clash, you'll know what champions of the enemies tend to play. If you see any 1 or 2 tricks on the enemy team, then you want to prioritize banning out those players first. Next, ban any champions that the opposing team plays a lot that are either strong in the meta or fit well into team compositions that counter you, especially if they're both strong in the meta and they fit well into the team compositions that counter you well. For the first round of picks, you want to go for power picks you can fit well both into your primary composition and ideally one of your backup compositions. Jungle, bot lane, and support are all traditionally safe roles to pick up early since there aren't as many strong counters for each of these roles. However, in certain instances, you may want to save one of these picks for later in the draft, since it can drastically change how your composition functions. If you're playing a game mode that has a second ban phase like professional play does, who you ban in the second phase can also be extremely important. Generally, teams will show their hand a bit with their first 3 picks, so you can often sabotage their team compositions by banning out key champions who are strong in those team compositions. For example, if the enemy team looks like they're going for a Protect composition, you can ban out some key enchanters like Janna and Lulu and force them on some potentially less optimal support. Let's go through an example draft to see how it works in action. You go into Champion Select with your team and you see that you're on Blue's side. This means that you are first pick, allowing you to secure a powerful champion in the first round, but your enemy gets last pick, meaning that they can counterpick one of your lanes. Your team intends on drafting an attack composition, so you should be targeting champions in the ban phase that are good in catch compositions and protect compositions. For these reasons, you ban out Rakan, Sion, and Janna. On the other side, the enemy team bans out Skarner, Kai'Sa, and LeBlanc. These are all champions that perform well in catch compositions, so it indicates that the enemy team may be going for an attack composition or a split composition. Not wanting to reveal too much, you grab Warwick as your first pick, a champion that is good in both attack and catch compositions. The enemy team grabs Kha'Zix and Camille in response. These 2 picks, along with their bans, rule out poke and protect compositions. It's still possible that they could go for an attack composition, but it's more likely that they'll go for a catch composition or a split composition based on how they've drafted so far. Since the enemy team is most likely going for a catch or a split composition, your options are going for an attack composition, a catch composition, or protect composition. If the enemy team is going for a catch composition, then a protect composition would be ideal, but if they wind up going for a split push composition, then an attack composition would be preferred. Going for a catch composition of your own is the safest bet, since catch compositions are good into split push compositions and aren't at a disadvantage against other catch compositions. However, there's no reason to settle on a composition just yet. Maybe the enemy team will give you more information with their next picks. To keep your options open, you go for Malphite and Varus. Malphite is a solid pick for an attack and catch compositions, and he's not too shabby in a protect composition either if he uses his crowd control for peel instead of engage. Varus is an all-around pick that's good in attack, catch, and protect compositions. His high DPS makes him good for attack compositions, his ult makes him good for catch compositions, and his hybrid damage makes him good for protect compositions. Your opponents pick up Sivir in response. While this doesn't give you information on whether they're favoring a catch or a split, since Sivir is good in both, it does pretty much rule out an attack composition, since there are much better picks available for attack compositions than what they've chosen so far. In the second ban phase, the enemy bans Lulu and Vladimir, and you ban out Blitzcrank and Zed. Your opponent picks first in the second pick phase, and they grab Thresh. This pick solidifies to you that they're going for a catch composition, and that your best response will be to draft 2 champions who are good in protect compositions with your 2 final picks. As a result, you grab Taric and Azir, giving your team a strong 2-carry protect composition that also has decent engage and pick potential. The enemy team rounds out their composition with Zoe, but you've clearly won the drafting phase, setting your team up for success once you get into the game. What's great about this is if the enemy team had reversed their picks, the outcome would still have been the same. A Zoe pick would have also indicated they were going for a catch composition, indicating that you should go for more protection-based champions. But what if you get down to the second part of the pick phase and you still don't know what composition they're going for? What if instead of a Zoe or a Thresh, the enemy team went for an Aurelion Sol or a Talia instead, champions who are both decent in both catch compositions and split push compositions? In that case, you should go for your safest option, which would be a catch composition for yourself. The power of this way of thinking during the draft phase is as long as you adapt your draft accordingly, you will never lose the drafting phase. The goal when approaching the draft is that you want to, at a bare minimum, rule out 2 adjacent team compositions. If you do this, you're guaranteed to, at worst, go even in a draft. If you can rule out 3 adjacent team compositions, then you're guaranteed to be in a favorable matchup. For example, if you rule out that your opponent is going for a poke or a protect composition, then that effectively takes away the 2 compositions that counter catch compositions. This means that if you draft a catch composition for yourself, then worst case you'll go even if the enemy team drafts a catch composition, and best case you'll be in an advantage if they draft an attack composition or a split push composition. If after a few picks you're able to determine that your opponent is not going for a split push composition, then that only leaves attack compositions and catch compositions as possibilities. Both of these compositions are weak against protect compositions, so if you draft a protect composition, then you're guaranteed to have an advantage. All of this, however, is dependent upon your team's flexibility in their champion pools. It doesn't matter if a protect composition is the right choice if your teammates don't know how to play champions who are good in protect compositions. This is why it's so essential to fill out the template for each type of team composition and figure out what your weaknesses as a team are and practice champions to help fill in those weaknesses. It's also important to note that recognizing team compositions and the correct responses to different picks and bans is a skill that requires practice, just like CSing or landing skill shots. If you're going to be your team's shot caller, I highly recommend you practice drafting phases. This can be done in your own solo queue games by analyzing each pick and figuring out what would be the best response if you were in a team game. You can also practice this skill by watching pro matches and comparing what the LCS coaches do to what you would have done in their shoes. Another way you can practice draft phases is to do mock drafts with your friends and see who can get the better team composition. And that's everything that we're going to cover with this video. I know this video was extremely long and I commend you for making it this far, but please understand that we're just scratching the surface on this topic. There are so many subtle nuances to team compositions, and it would be impossible to go over all of them in detail. At the very least, I hope that this video taught you the basics of team compositions and how they can be useful to you in both solo queue and team play. I hope this video will encourage you to look at your team compositions more critically and really analyze what your win conditions are in each of your games. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you have an idea for another video that you'd like me to do, please leave a comment below. If you'd be interested in me doing follow-up videos that delve deeper into specific team compositions, then leave a comment with your favorite team composition. Additionally, I'm quickly approaching 10,000 subscribers, and I want to do a special thank you video when I reach that milestone. So if you have any suggestions for what type of video I should do, please let me know. And if you've made it this far in the video and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my videos. I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium, signing off.